Have you ever wondered what it's like to own your own business? Be your own boss? Welcome to Season 7 of Business Mentorship, Keepin It Real, where we meet with corporate leaders who have taken the leap to business owner and join us as part of the Share Your Stories Online series. Hello, I'm Trish Tonak, and today we're going to meet a small business owner, celebrate their great idea, and introduce you to the person behind the logo. We invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the show. Our guest joins us from Lisbon, Portugal. Dr. Joy Wiggins is the founder of her own firm as an author, TEDx speaker, and consultant, taking her experience and working with women to create inclusion and cultural agility. She specializes in organizational development, cross-cultural communication, and workplace transformation. Joy's going to share her story on entrepreneurship and give us a behind-the-scenes look into the life of a small business owner. And I'd like to welcome and introduce everyone to Joy.
Hi, thank you for having me, Trish. I appreciate it.
Listen, as a former professor, I'm sure our viewing and listening audience is quite interested in what was the catalyst for starting your own business.
Well, it's funny because I actually have always kind of been an entrepreneur. Even when I just graduated from my PhD, I started a house and pet sitting business because I needed money to pay off my loans for my student loans. So it's always kind of been inside of me. And I had a friend that said, hey, after you've been teaching now for like 12 or 13 years in the university, why don't you start taking some of the stuff that you're teaching in the university and go out and consult and do some speaking? And I was like, well, professors speak all the time anyway, and we're always trying to engage our students. So I thought, yeah, that sounds like a natural progression. And then because of my university affiliation, I was, booking quite a few speaking gigs. And so it just got better and better. And I think I really honed that skill. And so I always had it as a side hustle up until about COVID. And then in COVID, I was recruited into corporate. And so I was the DEI research and content lead in corporate. And most of that came from my speaking gigs. So that came from someone watching me speak and they offered a job to me. So I think it was always kind of naturally there. And then when I left corporate, I decided to go full bore into consulting. So.
Right. And you've also done a TEDx, and your TEDx title is Liberating Women in the Workplace. Give us the behind the scenes on why you chose that title and why TEDx. I mean, I think we all assume as entrepreneurs that TEDx is the platform where we can really push the envelope in terms of our visibility. Mm-hmm. So give us an indication as to why, first of all, TEDx, and two, the topic, liberating women in the workplace.
Well, I think, the thing to think about with TEDx, first of all, my university was putting it on, and I had applied 3 times. So I actually had a life coach, tell me that she was going to do the TEDx, and she's like, oh, you should really think about it. And then I started working with the Entrepreneur Institute, and they were like, all the speaking that you're doing, you should really think about it. And the other thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to write a book. And so I thought that might be a natural progression. It would help me hone my skills for, getting those 3 takeaways. Professors, we tend to be very verbose. And for us, it's difficult. And for the 3 professors that were presenting with me, we were the most nervous. And we were the ones behind the scenes just going, oh.
The stage fright.
Students were fine. The students got up on stage. They were fine. So I think it was really good for us to be concise, to hone our skills, to think through like how do I get my message across in a way that everybody can understand and it's not so academic? And I
Right.
think that that then helped me to write the book with my co-author, who was also an academic. So she was really good about writing less academically speaking, but it was a new skill for me. So
I love the transition, how, you had other people who were kind of saying, listen, you might want to consider, the TEDx stage because it's a great opportunity to expand the visibility of your message. What was the guiding light behind liberating women in the workplace? Because that's a pretty controversial topic to start with.
yeah.
Because I think, it's not really something that we put to the forefront in terms of topics trending in business. It's kind of something that's behind the scenes. We really don't like to talk about it very much.
That's exactly why I wanted to talk about it, was because I think that as young girls, we are conditioned to compete with each other because we come from a system that um, puts women in a marginalized position. And
Right.
so I think it's really important that we talk about that, but then we also talk about how do we feed that system unintentionally.
Right.
And some of that's by sabotaging each other. So we learn that even when we're young girls. You
Mm-hmm.
know, little girls are competing, they get backbitey, they get gossipy. They might compete for male attention. And so then as you go through elementary school and then junior high and then high school, we are taught to kind of compete with each other. And
Right.
it's the subtleness of it. And then it slips into the workplace. And so for me, I could see that my first job as an academic and my first professor position, I could see that first the tenure expectations were very nebulous. Like we didn't know what they were. And so that created this sense of unsettling in the workplace. And so the women, mostly women in teacher education, started to compete with each other unintentionally. I don't think that that was meant to. And so the story that I start off with in the TED Talk was this kind of subtle dig, but I don't even think the woman that did it meant to do it. I don't even think
Right.
she meant to sabotage, but it just still was like, this is interesting. So I went down to the basement of another dean of a woman that was in the basement, and she's like this crone in the basement, you know? And I was like,
That leaves quite a visual, I have to say.
well, imagine this. So she's got her desk piled high full of books, kind of in a dark basement of this, older building. That, by the way, my parents went to college at this university. And so she said, "Oh, that's a thing." And I was like, "Oh, this is," because I told her the story. And she goes,
Right.
"Yeah." She pulls out this big, huge pile of papers and said, "It's a thing called cutting down the tall poppies." That's
Right.
what they call it in Australia.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, I hadn't heard of that." But that, as I was reading these articles, I was like, "Wow, that is it." And so I started to interview other women to find out. And then it turned into this full-scale research. And then as I went to a different university after that, I started to find out it's happening here too. It's happening in the
Right.
workplace, it's happening corporate. As I went into consulting, I could see it happening everywhere. And so as I talked about it more and more, I could see that it was resonating with more and more women.
Sure. Well, there's
So,
actually the Poppy report, right? That comes out
yes.
every couple years. They ask, I don't know how many thousands of women around the world and try to get their opinion. And the really sad thing for me, I mean, you and I have been in business a long time. I mean, from you take your academia as well as your entrepreneurship and you mush those numbers together, we're in the double digits in terms of
For sure.
expertise. And what's really alarming to me is I really don't feel that the dial has changed. I still feel that there's this systemic, whether, to your point about whether it's intentional or unintentional, where we really don't try to help each other rise so much as see it as a competitive nature, which is really the reason why I use the tag, the hashtag in this platform, collaboration over competition.
Mhm.
We're both going to go so much further if we help each other.
Yeah. There's a great metaphor that is like the crabs in the bucket. And so when I lived in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of people go crabbing. And it was so funny because I asked this guy, sorry, my cat is in the background. She can't help but not be. I don't know if you can see her, but I
No.
can feel her. But yeah, it's really difficult because there's the crab in the bucket thing is that the crabs are in the bucket, and as the male crabs, as they try to get out, they will pull each other down and devour each other. And this is a friend of mine who's a crab fisherman said this to me. He's like, "Oh, I've been thinking about your idea about crabs in a bucket." He goes, "The females just sit there in the crab. They don't actually do that." So I used to think if we are modeling after a more patriarchal society and we're modeling after the hierarchy, competition over everything, then that pulling each other down and devouring each other seems like an apt description
Yeah.
of what corporate life looks like,
Yeah,
what any kind of
absolutely.
competition looks like. And so I think it's when we're trying to function and navigate within a bucket that we didn't build, that wasn't, we had no say in building, then it's really difficult for us to thrive in a system like that.
Right.
And so the book is all about that. And it moves from sabotage, like what does sabotage look like? How do we do it? Where does it come from? How does it happen along lines of difference? So we give a good history of the feminist movement and what that looks like and why women sabotage each other, when we come from a scarcity mindset.
Right.
Um, and it's true that we have systemic barriers, but we also have what are we feeding to those systemic barriers by
Right.
competing with each other and not having collective action and strategizing together and supporting one another, even though our differences may look very differently.
Sure.
So, we might have a very different experience than the woman next to us, but that doesn't mean that we still can't come together, learn about their experiences, and support them in whatever way they need, not necessarily what
Right.
we think they need.
Yeah, be where they are, right? Which is
Mhm.
what I always say about this particular community. We sort of give you an opportunity to participate in the community wherever you're coming from, so
Mhm.
there's no pressure. There's a lot of grace there and giving you the chance to say, if this is the topic that resonates with you and we're doing our quarterly networking event, join us,
Mhm.
throw your hat into the ring and tell us about your experience relative to the topic. And if it doesn't resonate you with right now, that's okay. You can join us at another time. So I love the point about meeting you where you are, because if I've learned anything in sharing over 500 stories on our platform, is that we're all so different and yet the same.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
experience similar regardless of age, culture, geographic location. We're all experiencing the same types of things, just not at the same time.
Yeah. I used to have with my students, I taught multicultural literature. And one of the things I wanted them, Lee Galda came up with this technique of mirrors and windows. And so, how do you see yourself in the character that you're reading? And then, how do you get a window into a different insight,
Right.
something that you would not have otherwise known or understood? And I think that you can take that exercise into just about anything that you do.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, actually.
It really is.
It
And so
is.
I always think about mirrors and windows. Like I
Yeah,
see myself, and that's how I can make that connection to
sure.
that person because we want that human connection. We want a sense of like being seen and see each other.
For
But
sure.
then we also have to acknowledge that we have those differences, and that's where that window comes from.
Right. Now, the title of your book is From Sabotage to Support. So, if you could share with our viewing and listening audience one tool that you feel will help build a culture of support, what would that be?
One of the things that I've been telling a lot of mentorship programs, I'm doing a lot of those, rolling those out for different companies. And when we think about sponsorship, one thing that you can do when another woman is not in the room, you can amplify her work. And a good way to do that is by understanding what she does. So having a 2 to 3 sentence description of what she
Yeah.
does. So what I do is I have a spreadsheet and I write down all my friends that I want to recommend. I have a 2 to 3 sentence quick description. So if I'm either at a networking event, I can pull it up on my phone, or if I'm connecting them on LinkedIn or through email, I can pull it up and say, this is what they do.
Right.
And I also have something in my newsletter that's called the Global Voices Corner, and it's typically just amplifying voices in the work that people are doing that I've maybe been talking to lately. And so I'm like, hey, if you have a program that you want people to know about, I'll put it in my newsletter. And, you never know. And so I think
Sure.
it's one thing to be a sponsor, but to be a sponsor when that person's not in the room. And to remember that if we come from an abundance mindset and we know that the more that we give, the more that we, will keep that
Comes
cycle of
back.
abundance
Yeah.
going.
Yeah,
And so you're
absolutely.
you're feeding the cycle of abundance by doing that.
We call it your elevator story because I
Mhm.
think that, the pitch is passe. The pitch sounds so aggressive and so unnecessary, whereas the story is really giving you an introduction to the person behind the logo, which is really what the show is all about, right? Let's
Yeah.
meet the person who's behind that wonderful logo and the story and the marketing and the wonderful website. Who are they? Who is the individual that we'd like to connect with? Because those are the people that we buy from,
Yeah.
really, right?
Yeah. And
Those are the
trust has
people
to
that
be
we want.
established.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, really wonderful advice. I really appreciate the mirror and window visual because you're absolutely right. I think we can apply that in any given situation in life. And it's a really wonderful way to give us that pause
Mhm.
before we respond, especially if we find ourselves in a situation that may be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and give us that little bit of grace before we take the time to make a response. So that's really wonderful.
Well,
Now,
and part
what?
of my work with cross-cultural communication is showing people how to do that. So, like
Right,
cultural agility is showing people how to read a room, how to pivot when necessary, and
right,
how do you start to realize that your own socialization informs the way that you're going to interact with the people in front of you. And if they're from very different cultures, whether that be, racial, gender, LGBTQI status, immigration status, country specific, nationality, whatever ability, etc., you can still have a mirror to that person. You can still see yourself in that
for
person,
sure. Yeah,
understand
for
the
sure.
basic human experience, and you can also see, wow, this is a window into a different culture that I've never experienced. And how do I learn more with humility and curiosity
Right.
about that person rather than judgment and from my own socialization?
We're still all at the basic of everything. We're still all humans. We're still all looking for the same things. We're looking for love, acceptance, community. And so the need or the basic function of why we're here is still the same. We just need to find the connection piece, right? That crosses some of those barriers and gives us an opportunity to look at things from a different perspective. So I think you've given us some really great tools to think about that, Joy. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, one of the things that we do in our guest blog is we talk about 3 words of advice. And your 3 words are trust your instincts. So I'd
Mhm.
like you to share with our viewing and listening audience why those 3 words are important to you in the work that you do.
Yeah. I think as women, sometimes we are socialized in that way to not trust our instincts or our intuition. And sometimes we get swayed by looking at what other people are doing. And so that might be like if you're watching YouTube or you're on social media and you see somebody else's feed that looks like they are blowing it up and they're doing great, you don't actually know their story behind all of that. You don't actually know their struggles. You don't actually know how long it took them to get there.
Right,
And I think when you ask somebody something like that, they're like, "Oh my gosh, do you know how long I've been doing this? Or how many times I've failed, or how many risks I've taken, or
right,
what I had to give up or sacrifice to get to this." And so I think when we trust our instincts, we have to know what's best for us. And we have to know what is authentically us. And we don't necessarily have to go and buy all the packages and buy all this stuff to align with somebody else's business plan. I mean, it's good to do that if you feel like it's going to be really necessary. But for me, a lot of times I'm like, wow, I could have saved a lot of money just by going with what I already knew.
right.
You
So
know,
true. Yeah,
like I already know that going to a networking event that I'm strategic about. And like I go and I know who's going to be at the event, I know who I'm going to talk to, and I know what the purpose of that event is. And I'm really strategic about when I go to it. I know that that's usually when I get my warm leads. That's
sure.
usually when I get the connections that actually get me to a paid speaking gig or whatever. or a contract. And I know that those connections are really important. Going out and cold calling for me, because of the work that I do and the topics that I talk about, doesn't work. Now, that might work for somebody else,
Sure.
but for what I'm doing, that doesn't work. And I think that trusting your instincts, knowing like, okay, that might work for that person, but this particular model is not exactly what I think will work for mine. And
Right.
it's okay to take the risks and to try some of these things out. But if you like continually come back to, yeah, that doesn't really work. I already know what works. Like, trust yourself, trust your instincts, give yourself the grace and the love to trust yourself and to invest in you and what you think and what you already know works. Because more than likely, we already know what's going to work.
And I think strategic partners really help with that alignment, right?
Yeah.
Just having a brainstorm session with someone, even if it is on the thumbnail, which is very similar to what you and I are doing today, it can spark an idea, or you can think of someone that you can do a cyber connection with. And I think
Mhm.
that's the beauty of trusting your instincts, because
Yeah.
generally the people that we connect with each other, when we connect with each other, especially if it's through a cyber introduction, it generally goes somewhere.
Yeah.
Something happens, there's a positive outcome.
Yeah.
And I
I mean,
think
I think
that's
just,
really important.
yeah, I think just about every meeting I have somebody that I've recommended to
Right,
whoever I'm talking to. I'm always
right,
like, oh, you know who you should talk to? This
right.
person. They're doing this.
Exactly.
And and like I may not always know exactly what that person's doing. I'm like, ooh, I feel like this is what they do. Just explore it, see what happens.
What have you got to lose?
Yeah, you never know.
Right,
And
absolutely.
I like it when people are open to that, because I think that's where we can really come together in collective action and actually move the needle so that it works for all of us, and we move into an abundance mindset where we're like, wow, there's more than enough for all of us. We
I
just
completely agree. Yeah. And you know what I love, Joy, is that the the themes that you're sharing and the tools that you're sharing with us today are things that we can all relate to.
Mhm.
Because I think whether you're a woman in business or a man in business, that we've all had those crossroads where we've thought, okay, where is this actually going to take me? And if I move in this direction, where will I end up? And
Yeah.
sometimes not knowing is the beauty of taking the chance, right? To take the risk, especially when you feel that, well, it may be calculated, it may not be calculated, but what the heck? What have I got to lose? I only have one life to live, so I can always pivot.
Yeah. And in my family, we say life ain't no dress rehearsal.
Oh, that's so
So,
true. You only get one. I mean, you only get one kick at the can, as they say, right? Like
yeah.
there's only one road to follow, and the road that you choose is the one that's right for you, given the time and the energy and the place where
Mhm.
you are at that time. And I
Absolutely.
think the thing that's as a really important takeaway with the work that you do is that it's quite all right to pivot. You don't have to stay on the same path forever if it doesn't feel right. If you feel that there's something different out there, something
Mhm.
different to experience, just go for it. Trust your instincts and take the chance.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about what you should be doing all the
Right.
time. Everybody
Right.
should be doing something. And what people think about you, who cares?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
go and do what you need to do and be your authentic self. And the more that you do that, the more you will attract
And the
anyway.
happier you'll be,
Yeah,
right?
that's important.
Absolutely. Well, I'd really like to thank you for joining us today and giving me insight into your business journey and some of the wonderful work that you're doing. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us and give us a little bit of an insight into the person behind the logo.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Thanks, Trish.
To you, our viewing and listening audience, I'd like to thank you for tuning in for this edition of Keeping It Real. I'd like to send my personal thanks to all of our sponsors for their ongoing support and ask that you share and invite your friends and colleagues to subscribe to our show, Business Mentorship, Keeping It Real, found on YouTube and your favorite podcast channel. Joy and I would like to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you next time when we meet another business owner and celebrate their great idea.